Hello, everyone. I'm back, and it's time to do the last section of the list from number 33 to number one. My all time favorite film of all time at number one. All right, so let's get into it. All right, last we did Back to the Future from 1985, and that was number 34. So now let's do number 33, which is a George A. Romero zombie film called Night of the Living Dead from 1968. This black and white film. One of the greatest zombie films of all time, and it ushered in the modern zombie craze that ended up happening over time. Later, he ended up doing like what, six more zombie films, all of which were really great. But this was his start. This was his first. Now, I think most cite Dawn of the Dead, which is the next one after this, as his greatest zombie film. But uh, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth be, between the two because it's important. Night of the Living Dead is such an important film when it comes to horror and the zombie genre of film, right? But then I think Dawn of the Dead, the second one, is just a little bit more entertaining than the first one, and the remake of it, starring Sarah Polley, is even better than his original, right? So uh, I think that one was from 2000 or 2004. Anyway, so but Night of the Living Dead is one of the all-time great horror films. It's basically about a group of like seven people that end up coming to a farmhouse in Pennsylvania and blocking themselves in because they're being attacked by the undead, right? So it was influential in so many ways, but mostly it started that. It may not be the original or the first zombie film, but is the first, let's say, quote unquote, modern zombie film where you got all the tropes and everything of zombies eat brains, zombies move very slowly, all these different things that zombies do. A lot of people cite Romero as in, creating that image or that characteristics of zombies from this film, right? Uh, so it's also influential or unique. When I say influential or unique, it's also one of the few films that ended up, with the lead character being what was his name? His first name was Dwayne. What was his name? Jones. Yeah, Dwayne Jones. He was an African American. He was lead in a film from the 1960s that wasn't like a black exploitation film or something like that. It was like mainstream type of film, right? So that was also interesting about it as well. But it's still a toss up between it and Dawn of the Dead as his greatest film or zombie film, anyways. But it's one of the greats of all time, and I put it at number 33, and it's from 1968, Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero. Now, Romero did, like I said, six more zombie films, but of those six, I think only maybe Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead I would include. So, so he has four other films that you could actually put in instead of, let's say, Night of the Living Dead. You have Martin from 1976. All right. You have Dawn of the Dead, like I keep mentioning, from 1978. All right. Then you have Creepshow from 1982, that film that he did with Stephen King, and Day of the Dead from 1985. So those four films. All right. So that is number 33, Night of the Living Dead from 1968 by George A. Romero. Okay. So next up is a Paul Thomas Anderson film from 1997, and it's called Boogie Nights. And this is his best film, but he's pretty much every film he's done is worth watching. It's not, he doesn't have any bad films. All right. They're just one great film after another great film. And I mean, it was three films in before I realized that, the three films that I watched were from the same director. And then that blew my mind. And I just started watching all of his films. Right. So, but this film is about, it's basically almost like a history. And it stars Mark Wahlberg and others, Burt Reynolds and Julianne Moore, and who else is in it? John C. Reilly, William H. Macy. There's a bunch. Anyways, a lot of great actors in this film. But the main star is Mark Wahlberg, and he plays a porn star. So basically, this film is like a nostalgia look at the porn industry in the mid to late 70s when it started transitioning and going out of business because of the home, VHS beta market, where people weren't going to cinemas anymore to consume porn. They ended up going to video stores to pick up videos and watching the porn at home, right? So the big theater productions of porn went out in the late 70s as VHS and beta started becoming popular, right? So then you had all those video stores that opened up, and you'd have like a video store where 75% of the video store up front was all the films that everybody was renting, and then you'd have like a room or a section in the back covered by a curtain, or blocked off, and only adults would be allowed to go in there, and that's where all the adult films were, right? So, but people stopped going to the movie theaters to see porn because they could rent it and privately watch it at home by renting it from a video store. And this film is about that. It's the dying age of cinematic theatrical porn movies, and it's an extremely good film, and it's a bit funny, it's a bit sad, and it's a bit in between. So Mark Wahlberg stars, like I said, he's the big stud of of this production, of this film, and his character. I don't know if it's not. Is it directly? I don't know if it's directly based on John Holmes, but it's it seems like it when I watched it that they took the Mark Wahlberg character and made kind of copied John Holmes from it, because John Holmes was a big porn star in the 1970s, right? So anyway, so I don't know. It's just a great film. The scene where Burt Reynolds is going squishy in his cowboy boots, or any of the scenes with John C. Reilly in it. That character was what impressed me the most. Wasn't Mark Wahlberg, and you have the Mark Wahlberg scene in front of the mirror where he shows his private parts or whatever, right? So, which was a prosthetic, by the way. Anyways, the whole film was great. Most of all of Paul Thomas Anderson's films are great. All right, so if you haven't seen Boogie Nights, again, I highly recommend it. It's basically a nostalgia look at uh, the fading porn industry as it transitions from the movie theater into people's homes through VHS and Betamax tapes, right? So, all right, and so Paul Thomas Anderson also has 5 other movies that could make this list. If you didn't want to put Boogie Nights in there, you would put Magnolia from 1999, right, or Punch Drunk Love, which is one of Adam Sandler's greatest acting uh, exploits, because it's not a comedy, and he shows his chops as a non-comedian in a film. All right, so that's Punch Drunk Love from 2002. There Will Be Blood from 2007. The Master from 2012, and Phantom Thread from 2017. Any of those films um, could replace Boogie Nights, but I think Boogie Nights is his best film. So, all right, so that's Boogie Nights from 1997. It's number 32 on the list, and it's directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. All right, so next up at number 31 is a 1966 film directed by Mike Nichols called Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, starring Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And now this is Nichols' first film, all right, and it's a stellar film. It's based on the Edward Albee play of the same name. And it basically is about an older couple. Richard Burton plays a professor at a university, and his wife is Elizabeth Taylor. And they invite, after this party or whatever that happened at the university. Invite this new couple that's at the university over for drinks after that get together. So they come over and basically they're a witness to Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor just ripping into each other verbally, and it is one of the most powerful films I've ever seen in my life. And how to describe it? Well, I always say that, okay, there's a few ways. Okay, you have proponents that think that divorce should not be legal. Okay, well, if you have somebody that you know that thinks that divorce should not be legal, have them sit down and watch this film and see how two people who don't divorce will end up if they dislike each other or they fall out of love or whatever reason. One, they disappoint each other or whatever. See how nasty it can get, okay? And then it'll change their mind. Well, I'm a bit bold in saying that, but after watching this film, you would think that yeah, they should they should definitely get a divorce, okay? So another thing is if you want to scare off your daughter or your son because maybe he meets the girl of his dream or she meets the boy of his dream and they're 17 and they're going to get married when they're still in high school, just sit them down and have them watch this film and say, listen, this this could happen to you. Do you really want to do this, or do you want to be wait until you get to know each other better and have a plan and everything, right? So anyway, so it would scare scare them off marriage as well, because I would not I would not want to get in a verbal jousting session with Edward Albee because he would probably linguistically run, you know, run around me like I'm standing still. It's just ridiculous how good of a writer Edward Albee is, especially in this play. And the brutalness. I would rather, if I was Richard Burton in this film, I would rather Elizabeth Taylor punch me in the face and knee me in the groin 20 times than have to try to survive through her verbal acid. It's both of them, but Elizabeth Taylor, I mean, she blows you away on screen on in this film, and the acid, like I said, that's coming out of her mouth towards her husband. I mean, the insults that they're throwing at each other is just, oh man, it's just you're witnessing like brutality with nobody throwing a punch, right? It's just ridiculous how. Anyways, Nichols did an amazing job as in the adaptation of the Albee play, and Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. I mean, they were married at the time in real life, and then they, yeah, uh, oh yeah. That's anyways. It'll blow your mind, this film, if you watch it. It's a great film. All right, so that's Mike Nichols from 1966, number 33 on the list, and Mike Nichols is also the director who did The Graduate, which would be another one that you could actually put on this list if I didn't put Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, I would have put The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. That was a really good film as well. So those two films by Nichols. All right, so that's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf from 1966, directed by Mike Nichols. Next up, number 30 is the George Lucas film Star Wars. All right, I chose Star Wars even though Star Wars is the most important film, and what happened after Star Wars is uh, the next two films of the first trilogy. Lucas stepped back and let somebody else direct it, and he like executive produced it or whatever, right? So when I was making this list, I enjoy the third one, The Return of the Jedi, as my favorite, but I know that Star Wars is the most significant out of all the Star Wars films. The first one, because it established the genre, right? It established all those 9 films, 10, 11 films that have come after it, and it was so revolutionary at the time in 1977. I mean, when I was like young, young, we went and saw that in the theater, and everybody who went and saw that film in the theater, it just blew your mind how good it was, right? And because there was nothing like that before it, it was ahead of its time. All right, now you watch it now and you look back at it, and there are some parts where you look at it and you go, okay, they look fake now compared to what is available today. But at that time, you were like blown away. You were like out in space and going in these X-wing fighters and everything was just amazing. It was such an amazing film, and so I chose that one because I want Lucas to be on my list as the director, and if I chose Return of the Jedi as the Star Wars film that I like best, all right, uh, it would take Lucas out, right, because he didn't direct that film, right? So I chose Star Wars, and one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, right? Now Lucas, he's such a big name, but he touches things, but he doesn't direct as much. The only other film that he directed that could make this list would be American Graffiti from 1973. All right. So that's uh, number 30, Star Wars from 1977, directed by George Lucas. Next up after that, number 29 is a David Fincher film, and there's a lot of Fincher films that you could pick because he has a good amount of films. There's at least four of them that could probably make this list that's popping into my mind. But the one that I chose is Fight Club from 1999, the Chuck Palahniuk book that he adapted into a film starring Brad Pitt and Ed Norton. And that film, I can't. It's one of those films that if you haven't seen it or nobody's talked to you about it and you watch it, your mind will be blown about it. It's an extremely good film with a really awesome twist to it. And other than Pitt and Ed Norton, all that, what really blew my mind is how good of an actor um, Meatloaf was in this. Right, Meatloaf did a really good job. You mostly know him as a singer, as a stage performer, not as an actor, but he was in this film and uh, one of the actors, and he did a really good job. I found. I'm going, wow, he can act as well. That's really cool. So, uh, but I can't really tell you the story of it because other than what Fight Club is basically an underground, fighting club where people beat the crap out of each other, but they're also part of a club. You know what I mean? They're kicking each other's asses, but they're friends, right? So, anyways, it's more complicated than that, and there's a really serious twist in this film that will blow your mind. And so that's the reason why I chose this one over some of Fincher's other films. But those other films would be that could make this list, especially Seven would be from 1995. All right, um, Zodiac from 2007, The Social Network from 2010, and Gone Girl from 2014. Any of those, so five films altogether, including Fight Club, could make this list. I would have no issue with anybody putting any of those five films on the list. But Fight Club is his best film, right? So, all right, so that's Fight Club, number 29 on the list from 1999, directed by David Fincher. Number 28 on the list is a film from 2000, directed by Christopher Nolan, and it's Memento. And this film is basically a whodunit film, but in a way that has never been put on film before. And it's like, wow, it just grabs a hold of you and you watch because you can picture yourself in that situation and you go, how is he going to solve this issue? Basically, it's about a man who has lost his ability to retain his short-term memory. So he ended up having a head injury, all right, and everything up to that, I think it was a car accident. It's been a while since I watched it, but everything up to that head injury, he remembers easily. He never forgets. But anything after that, he forgets. All right, and he doesn't remember anymore. And he will remember it as long as he's concentrated on it, as long as he's keeping it in his short-term memory. But once he gets distracted, looks away or starts thinking of something else, then goes back, he's totally forgotten everything that's happened up to the point of his accident, which was a few years before, right? So basically, he would have a friend, and then he doesn't know that friend, right? If he met that person after the accident, he doesn't know who he is. And if he knew the person before the accident, he only has a memory up to that accident. So all the time that they've spent together after that accident, he doesn't remember. But his wife was murdered, and he's going to solve the murder of his wife. He's going to find out who killed his wife, come hell or high water. And how is he going to do it with no short-term memory? What he does is he writes himself notes, all right, and he tattoos important things on his body, so that even though he forgets, let's say he's searching for the killer of his wife, and he has that concentration for a whole bunch of hours, and then something distracts him, or if he falls asleep for the night, then he wakes up the next morning, he doesn't remember any of it. So he ends up seeing that his body is full of tattoos, and it tells him the story of what's going on, right? And then he goes on from there. So it's quite interesting, and you can understand how difficult it would be for a director to convince you that that person could do that, right? Could actually, you know, you got to suspend your disbelief on somebody actually doing that in order to enjoy this film. And Christopher Nolan suspends your belief. It's a really good film, and it's like a murder mystery, right? If you like murder mysteries, you're going to like this film. But add the twist that the person that is not a detective, well, he is a detective, but he has no short-term memory. So, yeah, so amazing film. Now, a lot of people maybe choose, The Dark Knight over this film, right? Maybe Inception. Anyways, I chose Memento. I think it's his best film, but there's three other films that you could add to this list: The Prestige from 2006, The Dark Knight from 2008, and excuse me, Inception from 2010. Any of those four films could make this list, right? All right, so that's number 28. Memento from 2000, directed by Christopher Nolan. Next up after this is number 27, and it's a Hayao Miyazaki Studio Ghibli film called My Neighbor Totoro. All right, uh, this is probably Miyazaki's best Studio Ghibli entry, but almost all of his anime films with Studio Ghibli are worth a watch, and they're all really good. So you could list a whole bunch of them. This one is basically, it's about two kids who end up befriending well, it goes heavy into Japanese culture, right? Japanese mythology. Uh, so I don't want to wreck it for you, but basically, Totoro is he an imaginary friend or is he a spirit that helps out these two girls? All I know is it's magical, and I watched it with my son, and he really enjoyed it as well. And all kids will be attracted to this film. So if you want a film like an animation film that you can sit down with your kids and your kids will be mesmerized by it, this is the film that you should choose. All right. Now I don't think this is the greatest of all the Studio Ghibli films. I think I've added that film in this list somewhere uh, as well. But this is Miyazaki, who's one of the greatest anime directors of all times with Studio Ghibli. So I had to put him on my list. So if it isn't My Neighbor Totoro from 1988, it would be Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro from 1979, Nausicaa or The Valley of the Wind from 1984, Laputa, uh, Castle in the Sky from 1986, Kiki's Delivery Service from 1989, Porco Rosso from 1992, Princess Mononoke. It's hard to pronounce. Forgive me, right? 1997, uh, Spirited Away from 2001, Howl's Moving Castle from 2004, Ponyo from 2008, and The Wind Rises from 2013. So count them. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11 films, any of them. Any of the Studio Ghibli films you could add to a top 100 list and it would not look at a place at all, right? But his best film, I think, is My Neighbor Totoro, right? All right, so that is number 27, My Neighbor Totoro from 1988, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. All right, next up is number 26 on the list, and this is from 1962. It's directed by John Ford, and it's called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Now, when I watched this, I was early 20s, late teens, early 20s, and I was quite impressed with it, and it's always stuck with me ever since. And then I find out that John Ford is the one that directed this, and then there's so many other John Ford films that you could watch as well, but I don't remember the details of this film from 1962. All I know is that John Ford is one hell of a director, and every film that I've ever watched of his I've quite enjoyed. So I wanted to add this one to the list, even though my memory of it is it's been 30 or 40 years since I've seen this film, right? So, uh, but it's one of the greats. You won't get any argument from anybody that John Ford is one of United States' greatest directors. And if it's not The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, it's going to be another one of his films that is going to make a top 100 list from somebody. And other film of his would be, let's say, Stagecoach from 1939, The Grapes of Wrath from 1940, How Green Was My Valley from 1941, My Darling Clementine from 1946, Fort Apache from 1948, A Wagon Master from 1950, The Quiet Man from 1952, The Long Gray Line from 1955, and The Searchers from 1956. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus that 10 films. Any of these 10 films could make a top 100 list. All right. So that's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance from 1962, directed by John Ford. After that, number 25 is a 1978 film directed by Michael Cimino, and it's called The Deer Hunter. And this film is about the Vietnam War, but it's a longer film, so you get to see the characters in the film in the States for a while, and then they go over to Vietnam, and then this film becomes like extremely powerful. And there's the Russian roulette scene is one of the most powerful scenes ever put on film. All right, and it may take you a couple of watches to feel the greatness of this film to understand it, because when I first watched it, the first time I watched it, it was a bit difficult because of its length or whatever, right? But then the second time I watched it, the length didn't matter as much, all right? And then the third time I watched it, I went, yeah, this is a great film, all right? And then I was pretty much sold after that. But the anchor of this film is when they're POWs in Vietnam and they're playing Russian roulette. That's all I have to say. The Russian roulette scene in this film, watch it. It'll blow your mind. Okay, so now Michael Cimino had two other films that could make a top 100 list, and those films would be Heaven's Gate from 1980 and A Year of the Dragon from 1985. But The Deer Hunter is his best film, and it's from 1978, and it's number 25 on this list. All right, so now number 24 is a Jonathan Demme film, The Silence of the Lambs from 1991. Some people think of this as a thriller. Some people think that this is a horror. If they put this into the horror genre, a lot of people argue that this is the greatest horror film of all time. If they put it in the thriller genre, many people will argue that this is one of the greatest thrillers of all time. All right. So either way, it doesn't really matter. It's just a great effing film. All right. And Jodie Foster does an extremely good acting job in this film. And this is one of the creepy-ass film and scary films that you'll ever see, all right? And some of the scenes are graphic, so be prepared. I mean, that Hannibal Lecter, not only do you get one serial killer, you get two serial killers in this film, right? You get the Hannibal Lecter character, played by Anthony Hopkins, and the FBI is using him because he's like a clinical psychologist who's also likes to eat people. Uh, use him to catch this killer called Buffalo Bill, who's capturing and killing women and skinning them alive. I won't go any further than that, but some of the scenes can be. I mean, there's a scene where Clarice, who's the Jodie Foster character, goes to visit Hannibal Lecter in his cell, and beside him is another clinically insane. Like it's a row of cells of clinically insane people, and the one that's right beside Hannibal Lecter is this pervert freak. And when Clarice goes in to visit with, sorry, Hannibal Lecter, when she's walking out, the guy beside Hannibal Lecter in the cage beside her jerked off and is now throwing throw through his semen through the bars at her. And that was a really gross scene, all right? And then what does Hannibal Lecter do? Talks to him until he goes insane and kills himself, all right? So this is how brutal Hannibal Lecter can be, right? And there's another scene where Buffalo Bill is close up to the camera and is filming himself, and then he walks backwards and he puts his private parts between his legs to make it look like he has a women's parts, and then he puts the skin that he's using to transform himself into a woman. And that scene to the music is like really creepy. But the creepiest scene in this whole film is the part where Clarice figures out who it is, goes to visit that because she has suspicions, Buffalo Bill's house, and then ends up inside the house and he just turns off all the lights and puts on an infrared mask or whatever, and then you see her struggling around with her gun in the dark, and he's like right close to her looking at her, right? And he can see her, but she can't see him, eh? That was like one of the spine tingling hair up on the back of your neck uh, scenes of a film ever. All right. It's like, yeah. Anyway, so if you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs, hopefully this didn't ruin it. But I think most of you probably have seen that film and you're relating to exactly what I'm saying about this film, right? It's such a good film. All right. So that's Jonathan Demme's The Silence of the Lambs from 1991. He has two other films that could make this list, and that's Stop Making Sense from 1984 and Swimming to Cambodia from 1987. But Silence of the Lambs from 1991 is number 24 on the list, and it's Jonathan Demme's best film. All right, so next up after that is a film from 1950, number 23 on this list, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, and it's called All About Eve. And this, if you wonder when people speak about Betty Davis, why she's still talked about, it's because of this film and a couple other her films. But this film, watch this film. This is an extremely good film. It's basically her um, older. She's an older woman in this film, and she's like an actress who's coming to the end of her career because her beauty is fading. And there's a girl that's much younger and prettier than her that's kind of replacing her in this film, and how what happens after that is quite interesting. Let's put it that way. But she has a presence on film, and she has the chops. She has the acting chops, and you can tell why. Kim Carnes sings about Betty Davis eyes. The eyes are in Betty Davis's face are really intense when she acts. And anyways, it's an extremely good film. And Mankiewicz has a few other films that you could put in a top 100 list. All right, and those would be The Ghost in Mrs. Muir from 1947, Five Fingers from 1952, and Guys and Dolls from 1955, Suddenly Last Summer from 1959, and Sleuth from 1972. These are the films that you could probably put into a top 100 list if you didn't put in All About Eve. But obviously, All About Eve is Mankiewicz, probably his best film. All right, so that's number 23, All About Eve from 1950, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. Next up is a film from 1955, directed by Charles Laughton, and it's called The Night of the Hunter. This is number 22 on the list. This one stars Robert Mitchum, and he is a serial killer. And what he loves to do is travel around the countryside, show up in a town, pretending to be a preacher, attracting a widow of some sort who has money left from her husband, and then killing the widow and taking her money and then moving on to the next town. All right. It was a very creepy film, and Mitchum he's such a good actor in this type of role, this nasty, mean kind of guy role. He plays it really well, right? So you will enjoy this film. And all through the film, you're going, somebody catch this motherfucker and shoot him. But uh, I won't tell you whether that happens or not. Okay, so uh, great film. If you haven't seen Robert Mitchum in any film, this is a film that you can see that, or The Sum of All Fears. What's the one? I think it's The Sum of All Fears is the other one that he's really good in. But don't quote me on that. I'll have to look it up again. No, Cape Fear. It's called Cape Fear, not The Sum of All Fears. Cape Fear, the original, not the remake with Robert De Niro. Although the remake with Robert De Niro of Cape Fear is extremely good as well. So either one of those films is great. But Mitchum plays a really good character in that film as well in Cape Fear. Right? Anyway, so this film, like I said, he travels around pretending to be a preacher to target women who are widows and take their money. All right, and dispose of the women when he's doing it. So it's a bit of a creepy film, but Mitchum, like I said, does a really good job. All right, so that's The Night of the Hunter from 1955, directed by Charles Laughton. It's number 22 on the list, and Charles Laughton doesn't have any other films that would make a top 100 list, in my opinion. Okay, next up at number 21 is a film from 1971 directed by Peter Bogdanovich, and that is The Last Picture Show. Now, this film is in black and white, and it didn't have to be, but it sets the mood properly, and it's one of the films that you don't mind it being in black and white because color would kind of make the mood of this film a little bit more positive or joyful because this is not a joyful film. I mean, it's not like an ugly film or anything. It's a group of people in a town in the 1950s that, if you grew up in a rural area and you had more ambition than to stay in a rural area, you can understand, the frustration. So it's kind of like a coming of age film with Jeff Bridges and what was another guy's name? Jeff Bridges is the most famous one. He had a best friend, and they both are growing up in this town. They're high school guys. Anyways, Cloris Leachman is in this film, and she's probably the best out of all the players in this film. Cloris Leachman is probably the best out of that film. She shows the desperation, which Bogdanovich is really trying to show, of little towns. This is in Texas, of little towns that just, I mean, why are they there? There's nothing to do there. Do you understand? It's just like monotony over and over and over again. And so he shows that, Bogdanovich does, in this film so well. And you get some interesting relationships that are kind of out of the ordinary in this movie. And Sybil Shepherd is in it, and she plays, the pretty girl in it. And there's a pool scene with her in it that like everybody got blown away with because nudity is so cool, right? So, uh, but overall, basically, if you want to watch a film that you don't even know why the film was made, other than to show, the monotony of life, right? but somehow you're just intrigued by this film. And when you watch it, you don't know why you enjoyed it so much, but you did because nothing really happens in this film. You understand? There's no, anyways, I don't know how Bogdanovich did it, but he did it, and it's going to blow you away, this film, but you're not going to understand why, right? You'll have to sit down and think about it and think about it and think about it, and you'll still not come up with a reason. But after you watch this film, you think, was a really good film, but why? I don't know why. It just is, all right? And that's The Last Picture Show, directed by Peter Bogdanovich from 1971. Now, Bogdanovich has two other films that I could include in this list because they're both really good. I don't know if others would or not, but I really enjoyed those other two films as well. And those are Paper Moon from 1973 and Mask from 1985. But The Last Picture Show is his best film, I think. All right, so that's number 21, The Last Picture Show from 1971, directed by Peter Bogdanovich. Next up after this is a film from 2003. I watched it once and it blew me away. Just the craziness and the psychological, I don't know if you would call it horror, but you know, yeah, this is a like gripping. The word gripping really grabs a hold of this film. Anyways, the film is called Old Boy from 2003. It's directed by Park Chan-wook, and I think it established Korean cinema. I mean, it established him like worldwide as a great director, and it put like South Korea on the map for films that you can actually watch, that don't stick in their own country, like they break through the barrier and go international. And Channel Park kind of opened up South Korea with this film, and people started investigating more South Korean films because of it. But this film, uh, I don't want to wreck it for you, so I'm not going to describe it too much. Just know that if you like psychological horror, thriller kind of films, this film is definitely for you. And he has like three other films that could make this list as well, and that is Joint Security Area from 2000, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance from 2002, and The Handmaiden from 2016. But Old Boy is the one that made him to North American audiences, and there's a reason why for that. All right, so that's number 20, Old Boy from 2003, directed by Park Chan-wook or Chan-wook Park. All right. All right, so next up at number 19 is a Japanese anime film directed by Katsuhiro Otomo, and it's Akira from 1988. And many cite this um, adaptation of the manga of the same name uh, as the greatest all-time anime film of all time. Right? It's kind of like a cyberpunk film with a bunch of motorcycle uh, gang members taking place in New Tokyo after an apocalypse. Anyways, it's when the film came out, the anime in it was extremely good. People were blown away by the actual anime of it. Now, when you watch it, it won't blow you away as much because of with CGI and advancement in technology. But the anime still holds up, even though it's from what, like 30 or 40 years ago, right? And the story also holds up, and the whole it's yeah. Every person that's ever watched any anime will cite this film, if not as the greatest anime film of all time. They may cite another one, but if you were to take 100 anime fans and tell them, give me a list of your 10 greatest uh, films, if Akira's not number one on their list, it's going to be in that top 10 of everybody, and some other films won't be, right? So it's such a great film. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's extremely good. All right, so that's Akira from Katsuhiro Otomo. It's the only film that would make the list from him. All right, so next up is a film from 1961, also a Japanese film, and it's directed by Akira Kurosawa, one of Japan's greatest directors, and it's called Yojimbo, and it's number 18 on this list. Um, I could have picked Seven Samurai. Most people would pick Seven Samurai as his greatest film, but I enjoyed Yojimbo a bit more than Seven Samurai, so I decided to put Yojimbo on it. And it's basically about a Ronin, but a samurai without a master who goes into a village where these two rival gangs, and he plays both gangs against each other in order to destroy them. And he's not a nice guy. He's not a nice character, but he kind of does good for the town, but kind of doesn't. So there's kind of like, I don't know, there's that duality to it. It's almost like a film noir where there's no real good guy in it, right? But it's a fun film to watch. The manipulation is quite fun, and the action is quite good. And what else to say about it? A Fistful of Dollars, the Clint Eastwood Sergio Leone film, was based on it. But basically, that's the Western version of it. So you have the samurai version of it, or the Japanese version of it, Yojimbo, and then you have the spaghetti Western version of it, which is A Fistful of Dollars. And then you have, what was the name of the director that did Walter Hill? Then you have the Walter Hill version of it, which is kind of like a gangster film where Bruce Willis plays the character, and he goes into a town and plays the two rival gangs off each other. But instead of this being a western, this is like a modern gangster film, and uh, Yojimbo was a samurai film. So you can watch all three of them. The stories are very similar, but you know, gangster, western, samurai. So, but all of them uh, are fun to watch. And but Yojimbo was the original one, so I would start there. All right, now, like you said, Akira Kurosawa is one of Japan's greatest filmmakers, so you would figure he would have other films on this list, and he does. And there's a lot of them. All right, so here they are. So first is a Drunken Angel from 1948, and then Stray Dog from 1949, Rashomon from 1950, Ikiru from 1952, Seven Samurai from 1954, Throne of Blood from 1957, The Hidden Fortress from 1958, The Bad Sleep Well from 1960, Sanjuro from 1962, High and Low from 1963, Redbeard from 1965, Dersu Uzala from 1975, Kagemusha from 1980, Ran from 1985, and Dreams from 1990. So a long list. So if you want to grab a hold of a great director and you don't mind subtitles, uh, then pretty much his whole catalog is just a one great film after another great film. Kurosawa, I mean. And you could watch all of his films and not be disappointed in any of them. All right, so that's Yojimbo from 1961, directed by Akira Kurosawa, and it's number 18 on the list. Number 17 is a Michael Curtis film from 1942, and it's Casablanca. You got to have Casablanca, one of the greatest film noirs, one of the greatest romance films of all time, starring Humphrey Bogart. I don't really have to go into Casablanca much. You've probably seen it. What is there to say it? It's like when you watch this film, it's like every 10 minutes you get a line in this film that people have quoted over the last 80 years. And you go, oh, that's where that came from if you didn't realize it already. That's what if you watch this film now and you've never seen this film before, and you're not a young person who's just, starting to experience life, you've been around for a bit, but obviously you weren't around when this film came out usually, right? So, but when you watch the film, you go, oh, okay, that's where that came from. Oh, that's where that came from. Oh, that saying is where that came from, right? So it's like a quotable movie. There's so many quotes in it, but that's not the greatness of it. The greatness of it is the acting of Humphrey Bogart and others, and the whole film noir version of this film. It's a great film, and you should watch it. So now, Michael Curtis is a great director. He's had a bunch of great films that could make this list, including The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938, Angels with Dirty Faces from 1938, Mildred Pierce from 1945, The Breaking Point from 1950, and White Christmas from 1954. And those are Michael Curtis's films. But his best is Casablanca from 1942, and it's number 17 on the list. Number 16 is another film noir, and it's directed by Billy Wilder, and it's Double Indemnity from 1944. And this is a great film as well. Um, it's basically about an insurance salesman who is smitten by a woman whose husband he sells insurance to. And then him and the wife plot to kill this husband in order for them to claim the insurance that he put out on the guy, right? So, and double indemnity just means that double indemnity is how an insurance salesman will sell you a life insurance policy. What he does is he'll say, this is how much money you'll get, but if you end up dying in this way or that way or that way, you get twice the amount. All right. But he'll cite things and he'll make them seem plausible, but in the insurance world, it very rarely happens. And if you die in this double indemnity way, it's very suspicious because nobody dies that way, or very few people ever die that way, right? So, but these two plot the killing of the girl's husband in a way that it'll be able to claim double indemnity. And it's basically somebody dying on a train or like falling from a train, right? So yeah, it's a great film. It's got all the tropes of a great film noir, and the suspense on it. Will they get caught? Will they not get caught? What will happen to them is really good. It's almost like Alfred Hitchcock, actually. And it's a great film if you haven't seen it. And it's called Double Indemnity from 1944, directed by Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder is another great of World War II era films, and after, and other films that could have been on this list instead of this one. And some people would even take this one off the list and put some of his other ones, like The Lost Weekend is another great film. Sunset Boulevard, another one. Ace in the Hole. So The Lost Weekend's from 1945, Sunset Boulevard from 1950, Ace in the Hole from 1951, Stalag 17 from 1953, Witness for the Prosecution from 1957, Some Like It Hot from 1959, The Apartment from 1960, and 1, 2, 3 from 1961. Basically, they're The Lost Weekend, Sunset Boulevard, Witness for the Prosecution, The Apartment. Any of those you could put at as high as number one on this list, and it wouldn't even look out of place. Imagine he. That's why Wilder is thought of similarly, like Kubrick or Scorsese or like Alfred Hitchcock, one of the greats, right? So investigate him if you have not watched any of his films. All right, so that's number 16 on the list. Number 15 is Spike Lee from 1989, Do the Right Thing. And this is Spike Lee's greatest film. It's basically about uh, an Italian man and his two sons who have a pizza place in Harlem where most of their customers are African American men, right? And one African American man who goes into the pizza joint sees all these Italian guys, pictures of them up on the wall, famous Italian men up on the wall, and he doesn't see any African American men up there. So he complains to the owner saying, "Hey, you're in a black neighborhood. Why don't you put up some like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. up there?" And he goes, I'm not African American. I'm Italian, and these are Italian guys, and this is an Italian place. You get that race relation thing going on, and so the black guy decides he wants to try to have everybody in the neighborhood boycott the restaurant, and it gets pretty nasty by the end of it, right? So uh, it's quite a powerful film, and it's Spike Lee's greatest film. So, but he has a few films that could make a top 100 list if you don't think Do the Right Thing is his best. Malcolm X from 1992 is another one. Four Little Girls from 1997, and my choice as well would be Inside Man, although other people didn't like that film for some reason. I thought it was quite fun to watch, and the way they robbed the bank was quite unique. Anyways, but Do the Right Thing is his best film from 1989. It's number 15 on this list, and it's directed by Spike Lee. All right, so next up at number 14 is the Fernando Morales film City of God from 2002. This basically takes place in Brazil, so it's a Portuguese film, Portuguese language film. It's basically City of God is like a suburb or a section of Rio de Janeiro, and there's a big drug war going on it, and it's basically that's what the film is about. Is about these warring factions in this suburb of Rio de Janeiro, and the film is quite intense. Let's put it that way, and you're going to be reading subtitles, but some of the greatest films are not English language films, and you're missing out if you don't watch films that have subtitles. All right, and this one, very powerful film. I keep saying powerful because so many of these films are so powerful, or they're and Morales does a great job directing this film, and I would highly suggest you watch it if you haven't seen it. But it's the only film that I would put on the list from him. All right, so that's number 14, City of God, directed by Fernando Morales. All right, so next up on the list at number 13 is a film by Richard J. Lewis from 1994, and it's called Whale Music. And this film stars, I wrote his name down because I keep forgetting how, Maury Chaykin. Now, Maury Chaykin is an American actor, and he's been in a lot of American films, but he's also in a lot of Canadian films because he lived in Toronto before his death, right? So, and he starred in a bunch of Canadian films, and two of my favorite Canadian films both star him. Whale Music. This one is one, and the other one is Cold Comfort, which was a pretty creepy thriller. Let's put it that way. But Whale Music is probably his best film, and this is basically a film about a recluse rock star who is making music for whales to communicate with whales. He's listening to whales and he wants to communicate with them because they have a certain, uh, music to their calls, and he's creating a soundtrack to play to whales, right? So it's an interesting concept, and basically a girl comes into his life and breaks up you know, what the isolation that he's like the intentional isolation he has for himself, and she kind of just destroys his world or breaks up his world, right? And basically, you'll think of the Chalkin character as Brian Wilson. Remember when Brian Wilson kind of went into recluse because of mental illness, and then he uh, kind of stayed in bed for the longest time or whatever. Well, this is kind of like that with him, but it's based on a Peter Quarrington Canadian novel, pretty much similar. And the soundtrack to this is one of the greatest Canadian albums of all times. Whale Music is. If you haven't found the soundtrack to it either, it's a really good soundtrack. So overall, everything about this film is really good, and it uh, quite impressed me. And Chalkin, it's hard to pronounce his last name for me. Did a very, very good job in this film. But I've been looking for this film for years on even on DVD, and I'm having difficulty finding it. I watched it like I got it from the library, and I watched it like I kept it for like a week, and I must have watched it like 3 times in that week. And now I'm looking for it to get it on DVD or however else, used or whatever, and I haven't been able to find it yet. So you may not be able to find this film. All right. So it's called Whale Music from 1994, directed by Richard J. Lewis. This is the only Lewis film that I put in a top 100 list, and it's number 13 on my list. All right. So next up, number 12 is One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest from 1975, directed by Milos Forman. And this film stars Jack Nicholson as a mental patient. Basically, he has a choice of going to jail because of, he plays, that boyish, charmish criminal. You know what I mean? Like the rules don't apply to him. He has a good heart, but he's a bit deviant. Let's put it that way. But he's charming as well. He's got that boyish charm, right? So, well, he gets himself into trouble, and then he has a choice of either going to jail. What he does is he ends up manipulating the court in order to have him be put in a mental institution instead, because he's thinking the mental institution is a lot easier than jail, right? And then he goes about with his antics that he did on the outside that got him into trouble. He's doing it on the inside, bringing hookers into the mental institution and all this other kind of stuff that he's doing. And he comes up against Nurse Cratchit. I can't remember her name. And they bonk heads, and who's going to win? And she wins, let's put it that way. And it goes from there. It's basically one of Jack Nicholson's best roles, and it's a really good film where what I took away from the film was the reason why they have mental institutions in the first place is to make people with mental issues better or better able to be in society, right? So the whole point of it is the mental health of the patient. That's the whole point of the institution, right? That's the reason why it exists. The problem is that whenever you make any type of institution, in order for there to be order in that institution, you have to set rules and you have to do things that maybe not in the best interest of the patient, but for efficiency's sake, right? So a lot of times the the reason for the existence of the institution just to run that institution takes away from its reason for existing because the efficiency and the discipline, everything needed to run an institution well, does not exactly correlate to the improvement of somebody's mental health. So the institution actually gets in the way of the improvement of the mental health of the patient, but that's the reason why it exists. Do you understand? So it's like the institutionalization pulls away from the effectiveness of the treatment because a lot of the treatments that patients get are to control them rather than to help them, right? So that's what I got from this film. And Ken Casey wrote the book that this film is based on, and Ken Casey's book is also extremely good. All right. And but that's what I saw in it. It's like the reason why these people are in there is to get help to become better. And there is programs and techniques and everything that you can use to help people with mental problems get better, to become more productive or improved. Uh, but in order for you to implement those things, it's got to be a bit chaotic to do it, right? So if you have a mental patient that may need help at 6 in the morning, but also may need help because of a problem at 4 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the best way for him him to get healthy is the trust of one doctor, but of course the doctor is not going to be available 24 hours, right? He will have a strict time, let's say from 9 to 5 or something, that you can that, and then he'll put up appointments, right, for you to come see him once a week or whatever. But that isn't the best way to help somebody mentally with certain issues, where you need to be available to them when the crisis happens, right? And then you lower the stress level of these crises, and that's how they improve. But these crises, if that's the word you say, don't happen at strict intervals, right? Okay, I'm going to have a mental problem at 10:30 because that's when my appointment with the doctor is. Do you understand what I'm saying? So a lot of the institutionalization of mental health goes against what is actually needed to help the patient the most uh, effectively, right? So it's the discipline and the procedure and the monotony of an institution in order for it to run efficiently on the work side, because these people are working, right? So, ones that are helping the patients, they're working, right? So they look at this as a job, where the patient looks at this as they need help, right? And the structures of the institution, the jobs and everything else aren't set up to best attune to the health improvement of the patient. It's efficiency, structure, and discipline, and so on and so forth. And you see that because in this film, the Jack Nicholson character is basically chaos. All right, and how would you help the Jack Nicholson character? Well, the way you help him is not conducive to a mental institution way of doing it. So they do something to him that basically doesn't fix him, but makes life inside that institution a lot more efficient. Let's put it that way. So efficiency over help, right? Anyways, I'm blabbering on, but that's what I took from this movie, and that's the greatness of this film. All right, so that's um, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest from 1975, directed by Milos Forman, and it's number 12 on my list. And he has three other Foreman has three other films that could make a list like this. And that's Loves of a Blonde from 1965, Amadeus from 1984, and Man on the Moon from 1999. All right. Next up is number 11. It's Sergio Leone's greatest film, and that's Once Upon a Time in the West from 1968. A lot of people may think The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is his best film, but I kind of like Once Upon a Time in the West a little bit better. Now, it's a toss up between this one and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as Leone's greatest film, but I decided to choose Once Upon a Time in the West because I like Clint Eastwood as an actor, but I see so many of his films. He's in so many westerns. But I also like Charles Bronson as an actor, and I thought he did a really good uh, job as harmonica in this film. So I decided this film over The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But either one, you can't go wrong. In fact, most of Sergio Leone's films are worth watching, especially his spaghetti westerns. Even Once Upon a Time in America, which is basically similar to a western, but it's in New York and takes place about Jewish gangsters rather than like Wild West criminals or whatever, right? So, but any of his films are really good. Sergio Leone has that magic. The shots where you get the close up of the face and you get the long pauses and everything moves slowly and you get that strong music with it as well. It all builds. You know what I mean? It's a really good technique, and he perfected it. But he has had more than just those two films that could make this list. A Fistful of Dollars from 1964, For a Few Dollars More from 1965, Duck You Sucker from 1971, and the aforementioned Once Upon a Time in America from 1984. So that's Once Upon a Time in the West. directed by Sergio Leone from 1968, and it's number 11 on the list. All right, we're in the top 10. We're in the top 10. All right, so next up, number 10 is A Clockwork Orange from 1971, directed by Stanley Kubrick, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And this film is based on the Anthony Burgess novel of the same name, and it tells about, well, Malcolm McDowell plays the main character, and basically this is a film about, can you condition a criminal to stop committing crime? All right. So basically, it shows Malcolm McDowell and two of his buddies. They're a gang. And they go out and terrorize people all the time, drive around in the fast car, break into people's houses, rape women that's inside, and do all this other nefarious crap that they do, destroy stuff. Complete chaos and pandemonium and you know criminal behavior. And what happens is he gets caught, and then he gets put in the prison, and they decide they're going to experiment on him to see if they can create a person who is a criminal not be a criminal anymore. So what they do is they expose him to, the violence and all the stuff that he likes to do, and basically feed him a drug that makes him feel sick and nauseous and want to puke. And what they do is they condition, every time he sees an image of that type of violence, they make him sick, and then they continue doing that until they don't have to give him the medicine anymore. All he has to do is see something like that, and that conditioning will kick in and make him feel sick. So basically, it stops him from becoming a criminal. And so then they release him early because of it, but now he has no defenses, right? He can't harm any other person because once he wants to throw a punch, he feels sick and he wants to puke, right? So basically, he goes out back into the world and now has no way of defending himself. All right. So he ends up becoming victimized, right? So the victimizer becomes the victim, right? And is it right to put a person out? It's like taking, let's say, a cat and declawing them and then putting them outside, right? If you're going to declaw a cat, he's an indoor cat. If you want to put him outside, leave his claws because he'll need to defend himself, right? So it's that kind of, anyways, it's a brilliant way of doing it. And it takes place in a future kind of dystopian society that Burgess created in his book. And the language may set people off a bit. Like they'll watch the movie and the language will be a barrier to them understanding the movie until they get used to the language, because the language Burgess created was like English, but you have Russian in it as well, and there's kind of a slang, Russian English slang mix in it, that it's almost like he created a new language. And sometimes it's hard to follow what McDowell and the others are saying, because you've never heard those words before, right? So it takes a few viewings to really appreciate this film. All right. But well, I always toss up between this film and Full Metal Jacket as his greatest film. But he has so many good films, right? So it's hard to choose one over the other because they're all really good. So, but I decided to choose A Clockwork Orange. But he has The Killing from 1956, Paths of Glory from 1957, Doctor Strangelove, which is one of my all-time favorite films as well, from 1964, 2001, A Space Odyssey. A lot of people picked that film as his greatest film, but I find it kind of slow, uh, and it is a strange experience to watch that film because I don't think there's any soundtrack to that film really. It's a lot of, well, you get a lot of it, of the breathing where you hear it like in that film, and it's kind of creepy. But that's what Kubrick was going for, because how the computer on the ship or whatever, like, you know, it's supposed to be that way. Let's put it that way when you watch it. Barry Lyndon from 1975, The Shining from 1980, that famous scene where Jack Nicholson takes an axe to get after his wife who's locked herself in the bathroom, and then he makes a hole in the door and sticks his head through and goes, "Here's Johnny," is like ooh, if you ever watch Johnny Carson late at night, when Ed McMahon says that, and then he uses it as a way that he's going to kill his wife, is like really creepy. Uh, anyway, so Full Metal Jacket from 1987, which is my vote for the greatest war film of all time, and Eyes Wide Shut from 1999. Any of those films could have made this list as well. All right, so that's number 10. A Clockwork Orange from 1971, directed by Stanley Kubrick. Next up is number 9, and that is The Godfather Part 2 from 1974, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Now, there's a trilogy, Godfather 1, 2, and 3. Number 3, everybody considers as like a bit of a use, like a, that person who thinks they're your friend, but they're not really your friend, but that's kind of what The Godfather is. It's like an addition after the fact. It's the first two movies that are great, and it's a toss up between the two of them. But because I like the backstory and I like Robert De Niro in the second film, the backstory of the Corleone uh, father, right? Uh, you get to see his backstory back in Italy, and so I enjoyed that one a little bit more than the first one, so I decided to choose the first one over the second one. But Coppola has a few films: The Godfather, obviously from 1972, The Conversation from 1974, and of course Apocalypse Now. It was a toss-up between Part Two of The Godfather or Apocalypse Now as the one that I wanted to list. I went back and forth, and I decided The Godfather Part Two, just because The Godfather as a franchise is just a little bit better than Apocalypse Now. So I put The Godfather in instead, but easily you could put Apocalypse Now. If it wasn't for Full Metal Jacket as being my favorite war film of all time, Apocalypse Now would probably be it, right? So, all right, so that's number 9, The Godfather Part 2 from 1974, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And Godfather Part 2 is the only sequel of a film to ever win an Oscar. So it's really good. All right. So next up is number 9, and this is a film from 2001 directed by David Lynch, and it's Mulholland Drive. Now, there's a lot of films that you could pick from David Lynch because he's a bit out there as a director, but the one that I enjoyed the most out of all the ones that I've seen for him is the one that's the little bit less out there and more, palatable. Let's put it that way, and that's Mulholland Drive. Um, I'm not going to explain this film; it's too strange to you'd have to explain the whole film and then ruin it in order to explain it. But if you've never watched David Lynch, or let's say you've picked up, maybe you've watched maybe the Twin Peaks, and then you go, this is really freaking strange. I don't know if I want to watch Mulholland Drive, and that one is a good entry into David Lynch's films. But he has so many other ones. Eraserhead from 1977, The Elephant Man from 1980. I am not an animal. That was really powerful when I watched that. When he said that, it's like, yeah, exactly, you aren't. Why are people treating you that way just because you look different, right? But the way he screamed it out, the anguish. um, John Hurt did an extremely good job in that film, but I'm digressing. Blue Velvet from 1986, The Lost Highway from 1997, The Straight Story from 1999, and Inland Empire from 2006. All great films. Okay, so that's number 8, Mulholland Drive from David Lynch from 2001. Number 7 is a Coen Brothers film from 1998, and that's The Big Lebowski. And this is one of the one of the funniest films I've ever seen. That isn't, well, I guess it is kind of intentionally being funny, but it's not that slapstick or in your face kind of humor. It's like people are just acting and they're just being they're funny when they're acting, even though they're not, doing stand up or anything, right? So, and Jeff Bridges does a really good job at this. Basically, it's like his, it's there's two. there's two guys with the name Lebowski in this film. One is Jeff Bridges, who's kind of like a guy that likes to go bowling and drink milk and stay uh, in his robe all day long and likes to be called the dude, right? All right. And then you have the other Lebowski, who's like a rich guy or married to a woman who's rich. And he ends up owing money to some nefarious guys, and they mistake the dude Lebowski for the guy who's supposed to be rich Lebowski, and then they go after the dude Lebowski, and he's wondering what. Anyways, it goes on from there, and every character in this film is just very memorable, like the John Goodman character and the guy that like. Anyways, it's quite fun to watch, right? So, and I think it's their best film, although Fargo would come in a really close second. If I wasn't going to put The Big Lebowski, I'd probably put Fargo. Uh, but they have a lot of good films that could make a list like this. Blood Simple from 1984, Miller's Crossing from 1990, Barton Fink from 1991, Fargo from 1996, probably their second best film. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou from 2000 is probably their third best film. The Man Who Wasn't There from 2001, No Country for Old Men. That's up there. Maybe it's even better than Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? A Serious Man from 2009 and Inside Llewyn Davis from 2013. Any of those films could be in instead of The Big Lebowski, but I think The Big Lebowski is their best film. All right, next up after that, number 6 on the list is a Russian film by Andrei Tarkovsky, and it's called Stalker. Now, I didn't know anything about this film when I picked it up, but I decided I was going to watch some films in my Criterion collection, so I picked up this one and I watched it, and that blew me away. I'm not even going to talk about that film because I don't have the words or the mental capabilities of explaining how good this film is. You just know it's good, and it's basically a journey in a future time where three men go into this forbidden area, traveling. Man, it slipped my mind. Who cares? It doesn't matter. This is a great film. I have not watched a lot of Russian film, but if this is an example of what Russian film is like, I'm going to watch more of it, right? And Tarkovsky has a bunch of films that are really good, but Stalker is probably his best film. But I can't really say that because I haven't seen the other ones. Uh, but I know, uh, from word of mouth or from reading that these films would also make this list very easily, and that's Ivan's Childhood from 1962, Andrei Rublev. A lot of people speak about that one uh, as much as Stalker. Solaris from 1972, Mirror from 1975, Nostalgia from 1983, and The Sacrifice from 1986. So if you haven't watched any Tarkovsky, go out and look for it. Stalker is an extremely good film. All right, so number 5 on this list is a Sidney Lumet film, and it's from 1957, and it's 12 Angry Men. This is the greatest courtroom film ever made, even though it doesn't take place in the court. It's about 12 jurors who are deciding the fate over an African American man, and basically you see how juries work and how a lot of the times it might not be the evidence, a lot of times it might be something else from the person's actual personal background on whether they vote to convict somebody or not. Basically, Henry Fonda plays a juror in this film, and at the beginning of the film, everybody is voting guilty, where Henry Fonda says, I'm not voting guilty or not guilty. I just want to talk about this before we sentence this man to death. And so then he talks, and slowly but surely, people start having doubts about the way that they're thinking. And anyways, it goes on from there. It's extremely one of the greatest dramas ever put to film. All right, and it's such a. I've watched it at least 20 times. That's how good this film is. All right, so it's 12 Angry Men from Sidney Lumet. Now, Sidney Lumet, that was his first film, but he's directed a lot of other films that could make this list as well. And that's The Pawnbroker from 1964, Fail Safe from 1964, The Hill from 1965, Serpico from 1973, Dog Day Afternoon from 1975, A Network from 1976, and The Verdict from 1982. But I think 12 Angry Men is easily his greatest film, and it's from 1957, and it's number 5 on my list. Number 4 on my list is the second film by Studio Ghibli, but this one's directed by Isao Takahata. Takahata. All right, and it's from 1988, and it's called Grave of the Fireflies. And this anime film is the best film of the Studio Ghibli films, and it's one of the saddest films I've ever watched. If you can watch this film without crying, I will shake your hand because that's how seriously depressing and sad this film is. And it's basically about two kids in the aftermath of World War II who have lost their parents and everybody else, and that now they're wandering the countryside on their own, these two little children. And it's what uh, goes on with them during this film that's going to bring a tear to your eye. It's one of the greatest anime films, if not the greatest. A lot of people say like Akira that I mentioned earlier, but this one is up there as well. And Takahata has 3 other films as well that could make this list, but I don't think any of those 3 films are as good as this one. But a lot of people mention them. That's Only Yesterday from 1991. 2 other films, sorry. The Tale of the Princess Kaguya from 2013 and Only Yesterday from 1991. All right. So, Grave of the Fireflies, get ready with some tissues if you watch this film. And it's a cartoon, for God's sakes, an anime film. It's not even real actors, and still you're bawling your eyes out. I would suggest you watch it in the original Japanese with English subtitles. It's more powerful that way. But if you have to, you can watch it dubbed, right? So uh, that's number 4, Grave of the Fireflies from 1988, directed by Isao Takahata. All right. So number 3 on the list is a Martin Scorsese film from 1976, and that's Taxi Driver. And Taxi Driver is an amazing film. It's basically Robert De Niro's tour de force acting uh, film where he shaves his head and he wants to kill a senator and ends up becoming a hero instead. And his commentary throughout the film, because he drives a taxi, sees all the underbelly of New York City, and he's disgusted by it, and he wants it changed. And, he's just not a happy camper, let's put it that way. And he decides he's going to do something about it, which is to kill a senator. But that ends up getting thwarted, so he ends up saving a underage prostitute instead and becomes a hero to that girl's parents and everybody else. So it's interesting how Scorsese shows you how easy it is, where you could become like one of the most notorious killers of all time, and you end up becoming a hero instead. There's that thin line, right? You know what I mean? So depending on circumstances, could be, your life could be one way or another, right? So, anyways, it's a great film if you haven't seen it, and Robert De Niro and the Deer Hunter in this film, where he's against the mirror when he's looking in the mirror with the friggin' huge gun in his hand, and he looks in the mirror and goes, "You talking to me? Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me?" Right? It's like, spine chilling. You know what I mean? Anyways, it's such a good film. All right, so that's Taxi Driver from Scorsese. Obviously, Scorsese has a bunch of films that could make this list. Mean Streets from 1973, The Last Waltz from 1978, Raging Bull from 1980, The King of Comedy from 1982, After Hours from 1985, The Last Temptation of Christ from 1988, Goodfellas. It isn't Taxi Driver, it's probably Goodfellas as his greatest film. Casino from 1995, No Direction Home from 2005, The Departed from 2006, George Harrison Living from 2011, The Wolf of Wall Street from 2013, Rolling Thunder Review from 2019, and The Irishman from 2019. Lots of films by Martin Scorsese to choose, all being great, right? So We're getting up there. That was number three. Number two is a film from Quentin Tarantino, and it's from 1994, and it's Pulp Fiction, easily his greatest film. And it's a gangster film, and there's a whole bunch of situations that are kind of comic but not comic in it. And Tarantino decides he's going to manipulate time where some things that you see happen before other things that you see when they should be happening after you've seen them. But yeah, it's all gangster life and it's quite funny. John Travolta does a really good job in this. Samuel L. Jackson does a really good job in this as well. So yeah, it's a quite enjoyable film. Yeah, and I don't know how to describe it. It's just, I mean, the manipulation of time is quite interesting as you see the film go along. Sometimes you'll be confused, but by the end of the film, you go, everything makes sense or whatever. Like, there's one point where John Travolta is staking out Bruce Willis's apartment because Bruce Willis owes John Travolta's boss, Marcellus Wallace's, uh, owes him money, and he's there to collect that money, right? And so then Bruce Willis shows up, and John Travolta happens to be on the crapper reading, and then Bruce Willis shoots him and kills him. And then the next scene, you see John Travolta alive again, not in a black suit anymore, but in like a t-shirt and shorts, right? So it's like, huh, what's going on here? But anyways, when you watch the whole film, by the end of the film, everything makes sense, right? So, and there's so many iconic scenes in it. The scene where Bruce Willis is going to go save Marcellus Wallace, um, and he's in the pawn shop, and he's trying to choose weapons from a like a hammer to a chainsaw, and then he finally comes across a samurai sword, and then he goes saves Marcellus Wallace, right? So, anyways, there's so many awesome scenes in this film, and it's his best film. But like Tarantino's one of the great directors. He's a film lover, and then he just does odes to other films, but making them his own at the same time, right? So other films that could make this list are Reservoir Dogs from 1992, Jackie Brown from 1997, Kill Bill 1 and 2 from 2003 and 2004, Inglourious Bastards from 2009, Django Unchained from 2012, The Hateful Eight from 2015, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood from 2019. And that is number two on the list, Pulp Fiction from 1994, directed by Quentin Tarantino. So, what will be number one on this list? Number one on this list is a Ridley Scott film from 1982, and it is Blade Runner. Blade Runner is my all time favorite film, and it's a great film. The concept of the film, everything about this film is just amazing, all right? And you have great acting from Harrison Ford. Now, when this film came out originally, it wasn't too successful because everybody was used to Harrison Ford being this swashbuckling, you know, guy from Star Wars or Indiana Jones, right? And then he does this film, which is more cerebral, and it basically tells the story of a Blade Runner who is Harrison Ford. He's a police officer. His job is to hunt down um, androids who have escaped to Earth from the outer colonies, and he's to hunt them down and kill them. Basically, is what he does for a living, right? And there's, I think, five of them that come. They kill a bunch of people, take their transport, and come to Earth because Rutger Hauer, who's the main guy, wants to extend his life because when they make this Nexus 6, it's called Android, they give it a lifespan of only 5 years, and Rutger Hauer's on the clock, and he wants to go to Earth because that's where the inventor of the Nexus 6 has his company, right? And he goes about trying to find him to have him extend his life, right? So it is basically kind of like a morality play. Basically, if you can make artificial humans so human that they even think that they're human, but then you enslave them, give them only a 5-year lifespan, and expect them to obey, are you being cruel? Do you understand? Because what they do with these androids is they give them fake memories from other people. They because it makes them more, less crazy or whatever, right? Less erratic or whatever, right? If they have backstories, it makes them calmer, right? So they give them fake memories. They make them seem like they're human when they're not, and then treat them like slaves, right? And, not like persons because they're not persons in actuality. But they make them look like people, make them act like people, and make them feel like people, yet they're not people. You know what I mean? So there's that, it's a dilemma for the future or whatever. But, it's basically a morality movie, right? So, and it's quite a good film. And it's not high paced, fast paced. There are action scenes in it, but it's more an intellectual film. And they got Vangelis, the Greek electronics guy, to do the soundtrack in it. And not only is this my personal greatest film, that soundtrack is the greatest soundtrack ever made. The Vangelis soundtrack for Blade Runner is the best soundtrack ever made. Listen to it. It's great to, you know, calm your day down after a hard day's work. It will also relax you and put you to sleep if you wish it to, right? And yeah, it's just an amazing soundtrack, amazing film overall, and it's my all-time favorite film, and I think it's one of the greatest films of all time. Now, Ridley Scott is a great director as well, so he has other films, obviously, that can make this list, and that is Alien from 1979, Thelma and Louise from 1991, which just got a Criterion release, actually. G.I. Jane, a lot of people wouldn't put that in my list, but I really enjoy that film. G.I. Jane from 1997, Gladiator from 2000, and Black Hawk Down from 2001. All right, so those are the Ridley Scott films, but Blade Runner is his greatest achievement, and it is such a mind-blowing film. It's such a good film. All right, so that's the list. So I will stop here. All right, and after all of this, I hope that you have a list of films that you can watch that you haven't seen, and hopefully it will give you a great movie enjoyment experience. All right, so Blade Runner is number one on my list. Would you have thought that? Did you think that? Probably not. Usually that film doesn't make number one on most people's list. But hopefully you enjoyed all the movies that I've mentioned. All right, and bye for now.